we're back on the Don and Mike Show. Mike Morrison, National Sales Director for WS Display. Don Salelo to my right here from Exhibit City News and ExhibitCityNews.com. Special edition for this week's show, as we said on the front end, for the first time ever, Don and I are here live at Circle. Together, side by side. Scary, isn't it? It's the Omnichannel agency, guest experience agency here in Las Vegas, and very excited about talking on this subject today, which is very, very important. Just a few weeks ago, Don, you and I both, we heard this acronym, this ESG acronym, and we didn't know a whole lot about it. You can Google it, you can go search it out, but we got some experts here today with us to talk about this very subject. So I'm going to turn it over to my good buddy, Shawn Garrity, the CEO of Circle, and he's going to tell us all about it.
Well, absolutely. And thank you so much, you guys. Thank you for coming. First, I'd like to introduce the gentleman to my right, Sterling Armstrong. We're happy to have you here. And thank you. And we have Lou Raiola on the screen, without a doubt, the preeminent expert in the world of ESG for a couple of reasons. A, I believe that to be so. And B, because about a year and a half ago, when he brought this up to me, it really changed my world. And it was just before COVID. So it was stunning and earth shattering at that time. And now especially even more so. And I know Lou's going to highlight some of that. But as you look at the backgrounds for Sterling and for Lou, coming from very extensive philanthropic, corporate, agency-based backgrounds, and I think the two of them are going to be amazing candidates for us. And, Don and Mike, as we discussed, we really want to bring topics from an omni-channel perspective that are different, compelling, and really have relevance in almost a mandate style moving forward. And really excited about this segment, probably more so than any other.
Well, let's get started. I'm really eager to hear, Sterling, what you have to say about this subject of ESG.
Well, I am actually just getting into it as well. As you were just seeing the acronym being thrown around, I'm actually getting acclimated with it as well, making sure that we are always agencies, small businesses complying with whatever our client is looking for or what the government is looking for, so that we can have an edge when it comes to winning business or staying in business. Is something that I'm always looking to know more about and to explore. And when I heard about ESG, I, like you, was intrigued as well. So I think Lou is somebody who is definitely an expert within this space that I'm looking forward to learning more about it, as you are.
Should we? Yeah, as you look at it, ESG is three letters. The meaning in environmental social governance is a mouthful and a big platter. And again, Lou, I've known you over the years to be really leading edge, compelling and authentic. And again, authenticity and the commitment and the execution of these types of programs is everything. So again, I really thank you for joining us and for imparting your knowledge to our peers and our friends out there in this world. So without further ado, love to have you, take us through the world of ESG.
Thanks, Shawn, for those kind words, and great to be with you all here today. ESG can be a complex topic, but my hope today is to simplify it and kind of give you an ESG 101. And I'd frame it this way: it's a great opportunity to really do well by doing good. If I could establish one thing right from the get-go for the business operators and owners that are listening in and tuning in, it really is it's really a great opportunity. So today, what I'd like to do is just maybe take you through 4 segments or 4 key elements of breaking down kind of what is this ESG. And that is the first segment will be like, what is ESG, the factors, the trends that are driving this movement. The second will be, why should you care? What some insights into why this is relevant for you. The third will be, where are the opportunities? And ESG, as you'll learn, is somewhat of a risk component of business. So a lot of organizations look at it as somewhat defensive and need to do. And actually, I happen to look at it from the lens that it's a great opportunity to drive business. And then lastly, what are some actions that you can take to really deploy and get active in ESG? So with that, let me just frame it. As Shawn said, ESG stands for environmental social governance. And if you think about it in terms of just simple terms, these are the non-financial non-financial factors of what a company is doing. And typically it's viewed in today's lens as what publicly traded companies are doing. Now, let me just comment, even though it's publicly traded companies that are focused on their ESG, there is a very large emphasis on their supply chain, because supply chain is a big part of this. And so it takes in all factors of companies, private or public. Think of E as being the environmental, sustainable type of factors, climate change, deforestation, waste, pollution, things such as that. The social would be health, safety, and wellness. And of course, we all saw what happened in 2020 around not only that, but also around social justice, diversity and inclusion, things like that fall under the S. And then governance is not an area that I spend a lot of time in. Most companies have their advisors and such in that space, but it's executive pay, board composition, and elements such as that. So that's ESG. It's the non-financial factors. And maybe one of the most important things I can state here at the outset, think of it in this simple terms. Companies report their financial status, right? They do quarterly disclosures, they do annual disclosures. And what's happening today is the financial markets and other stakeholders want to equally, and maybe even more so, not only know the financial health of an organization, they want to know the non-financial good works of the organization and the health of the organization on those non-financials. And different than social responsibility, different than just straight up sustainability or cause marketing and some other terms you may have heard, the real difference is this is not nice to do or should be done. You're actually being rated and scored against standards, and those scores or ratings are publicly shared. So the investor community, possible employees, all can see a rating against your ESG. So it's equally as important, if you will, to be able to disclose your financials as well as your non-financials. So that's in short, that's kind of a quick 101 on what ESG is. Now, what are the forces that are really driving this change? Forces of change is what I like to call it. So, number one, we have this, what I call rise of the millennial and the Gen Z, or the rise of citizenship. This younger audience is really tuned in to understanding and wanting to work for companies that are doing well for society, making good products for society and the environment, a great workplace to be working within. And they are spending their money and voting with their money by the products and goods and services that they purchase. And they also share it. So that's the second point, would be kind of the technical evolution, is everyone's got information at their hands and they can share that information. And there's so much more data that is out there, and the ability for tracking authenticity and making sure that transparency is in place. The other component driving this is kind of on the political side, right? There's been a lot of division, both in our nation as well as around the world. A lot of different ins and outs. Are we in the Paris Agreement? Are we out of the Paris Agreement? What are some of the regulatory activities that are happening? Europe is further ahead in a sustainable regulations, but it's coming very quickly here to the US. And so I'll touch on that in a moment. And then lastly, another force of change that I would say is megatrends. Megatrends of the future are showing population growth. They're showing that more people are moving into urban environments, depleting of our resources. So there's a lot of different, and climate change, of course, is a big piece of this. No matter what side of the ledger you're on, it is truly in the business community, climate change is a real high risk area, and it's one that the financial markets are looking at. So those are a few of the what I would call kind of the mega trends that we're looking at. So maybe to end this first segment, what I'll share with you is that this is not new. I know it's maybe new, and I know all of you that have mentioned, you recently come across this acronym. It's really become topical since probably about 2019, but it actually has a long history going back to social responsible investing. It goes back to when Kofi Annan was in the UN, and there was a lot of different activities around this ESG movement. But it really did take, I'd say maybe started the tipping point in 2019. And that's when companies publicly started to declare that the definition of a company was changing. It was no longer about value to shareholders, which I say, i.e. profit. It was that the purpose of a company is actually value to stakeholders. And you have all these CEOs of publicly traded companies started to sign on with what's called the Business Roundtable, where they signed a declaration that stated this was the new definition of a purpose of a company. And there were other factors that were along those lines, where corporate America was embracing their role to be the drivers of societal change. And then, of course, 2020 hit. I mentioned earlier, COVID and the social injustice topics really gave rise to the social aspect of ESG and put a lot more pressure on companies in terms of their disclosures of ESG. So before I transition into why should you care about ESG, let me just pause and see if anyone has any comments or questions or anything they'd like me to amplify.
Yeah, I think a big point, Lou, and thank you for taking us through those. I think it helps to set the stage, set the table for what this is and the more compelling facts about this that are going to come back. But, Sterling and I spent a lot of time on some initiatives, strategies, and plans, observing what's happening out there. And I know your answer. What are the chances this is a fad and it's just going to cool down and go away? What are the chances of that?
I would say slim to none.
Slim to none. If anything, it's an accelerant. And, I know you're going to get into the next points of it. But Mike, as you know, you look at our industry, these are such critical components. When we talk about our industry being a leader really in a lot of sectors, out there, again, it's amazing to me how fast this is moving, how important it is, and it's not going away.
I actually do have somewhat of a question coming from the supply side of trade shows, events, and experiential. I've been doing this 21 years, and I want to hone in on the E for just a second.
Sure.
Now, not S and G, but E.
Yep.
It's been a few years now. I would probably say 10 to 12 years ago, at least in my world, when everybody started talking about recyclability, environmental conscious. And I agree with you, it was way before that, but it seemed to hit a fast track during that time in the supply side. And I came up with this phrase, I remember it, I'm gonna paraphrase a little bit because I don't remember exactly what I said because it's tough to get old. But one of the things is people love to go green and they will go green as soon as they make green. And my question to you would be this: what do you really think there is, even with governmental encouragement, I'll put it that way, that you need to be more environmentally conscious? At the end of the day, it's about pictures of dead presidents for many business owners. So I'm interested in your thought process of what's the encouragement factor going to be to go green and to be environmentally conscious? I'm sure you got some points on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I run into it a lot in some of the sectors that I advise in, which is, when the economy's going good and profitability is up, maybe we'll pay a little extra money for a substrate that is a little more sustainable than the current plastic, let's say, that I'm utilizing. And that's all fair. But where I would say that the evolution of this is no longer just on that one-for-one evaluation of, is this a sustainable material or is this a plastic? And the reason for that is, first and foremost, all of these factors are driving the financial markets. So a company that is not looking at this holistically is missing the point that they're being evaluated by the financial markets, either through their investors, through their debt and capital raises, the cost of money, because the organizations that are holding the Benjamins, so to speak, in terms of the loans and the related investments, are looking at these ESG factors. They're not looking at, are you removing plastic from your supply chain? That's one element, but they want to know, what's your commitment to the waste circularity or closed loop of your waste overall? what are the labor issues on who's making your product? They want to know downline in your supply chain, how the product's being made, what are your human human impact compliance and types of activities that are there. They're looking at greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not just, did I change out my plastic for a sustainable paper? They want to know how that good or service was shipped to the store or shipped to your convention center, and what was the footprint of that. So the equation of looking at the total cost is changing, and the financial markets in ESG are looking at it from that more holistic perspective of what is that cost that's very different than how I think we all used to look at what was the cost of a good or service that was maybe green. The other thing I would say is that there is a great deal of pressure that's now on the supply chain that's coming from, if you think of it this way, the financial markets put enormous pressure on the C-suites of publicly traded companies. So what happens? Those C-suites start to go downline into their procurement, into their operations, and then procurement and operations go into their supply chain. So where you're probably used to seeing in that supply chain, now they're starting to be asked a lot of questions about what is this material? How did you get it here to our location? And I think what you're seeing probably already, some of your venues that host your events, they have standards and guidelines now that they won't allow you to bring in plastics. They won't allow you to bring in items that may not have a waste disposition or waste diversion strategy or a repurposing. So there's a lot of change that's happening beyond, am I buying this good or service because it has plastic today and I could have a green alternative tomorrow? Much more holistic.
Yeah, I think, Lou, you bring up a big point there. And, it's the point that I'm making with our clients and our partners, saying, hey, I'm going to bring in a more diverse workplace. Check. Oh, let's separate our plastic, paper, and the other materials we're disposing of. Check. So it's just not going to be that way. You had to put a ring on this. You can't date it. You got to marry it. You got to be all the way in, but you really need to understand what that is. And you've used the keyword a few times, authenticity. And again, our industry is coming no matter what. I know I keep saying I'm the harbinger of these types of programs, but I know your next transition really is the why. And I know you've touched on that a bit, but this is a beginning. I know this is a beginning topic, but it's great that you're making these profound points. Well,
and there's another thing I think we all need to consider. I'm obviously on the senior end of this and kind of in my legacy of my career. And I'm fascinated by the Gen Z and the millennials that are a big part of what's driving this. And, millennials and even Gen Zs today are in positions of strong influence in decision-making. And, they're looking at making decisions that are very different than when I was maybe younger in my career and dealing with someone on the procurement or the purchasing side. The other thing that we have to keep in mind is, it's often stated in many different circles that, we're in a timing of the greatest wealth transfer in the history of our country, right? So our age and up, had very good fortunes in their careers, and all that wealth is transferring to our younger Gen Z and millennial kids and their families, and they're making different decisions. They're driving different influences and setting up different standards. And I'll leave the last comment on this to what we're seeing that is proof points for me is large enterprise type companies are modifying their requests for proposals. So the procurement side is already starting to change. They want to know, as a supplier, no matter how large or small you are, public or private, they want to know certain factors, and it's changing pretty aggressively. What certifications do you have against various different benchmarks? They want to know about waste strategies. They want to know about greenhouse gas emissions. So to your audience and to our audience, what I would say is get out in front of this, right? This is why we should care. It's coming. And the more that we can understand the constituents that we deal with, the stakeholders we deal with, especially the larger companies, the public companies that we do business with, my message is we need to get out in front of it. And those that do will win. So hopefully that answered your question.
Well, I think Sterling, thank you very much. I hope that does.
Yes, absolutely.
Sterling, I know from your side of it, you've been a part of the largest multicultural agency in the world. You've been a part of some of the biggest campaigns, most memorable campaigns that are out there. And your partner Ed Boyd with Connect the Dots. You guys are seeing things from a very long runway to where we are now. What would your thoughts be, your advice to the marketplace as people are talking diversity, making real change, talking about being a multicultural voice to industry or to business? What would your advice be to some of our peers out there?
Well, you mentioned earlier authenticity, and I think authenticity comes into strong play when it comes to the diversity market. How do you hire, but also how do you spend? So if ESG is going to be that component that can help companies be really dedicated, married, not just dating, the concept of being socially conscious, that's something that we're very much interested in seeing if that takes shape. Is it a trend, or is it something that we see long term? So one of the things that I have a question with, Lou, and I think you established where the E is coming from, but when it comes to the S, is it a situation of, are they looking at companies on how they hire within diversity or how they spend within diversity? Can you kind of give the audience a little, clarity on where that part of the acronym?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just one quick transition point that I want to share to give you kind of some real numbers of why you should care. So you probably have heard of Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock. He gets a lot of credit for kind of accelerating the movement. And that company is growing so much. I think the one quote I had in one of my last presentations was $7 trillion invested in companies. Now it's up to $9 trillion, I believe, invested in companies, taking big stakes. And his statement consistently is, you're at risk of our investment if you don't adopt these ESG type of factors. So there's real money here. That's just one entity. So, but Sterling, back to the social aspect of it, it's lagged. There's been for us ESG professionals, there's been more of a lag. It's been more challenging to really zero in on what are those social factors that rise to the top and then can be implemented or acted upon. And because it was much easier to identify the environmental sustainable solutions. But 2020 changed the game. And not only on, I happen to live here in Minneapolis, so very much, George Floyd and all that took place in our city, and then seeing what happened globally. The social injustice topic has really changed corporate boardrooms and companies overall. And unfortunately, there's some situations that have, I would say, turned ESG into a much more era of accountability. Because in the reaction to what took place in 2020, you saw a lot of companies making declarations and pledges. We're going to donate $500 million to Black Lives Matter or the United Negro College Fund, or we're going to do this, and it was declarations, right? And ESG came in and said, we're going to hold this accountable. Like, you need to report. There needs to be transparency. We need to see exactly what you're doing, and you need to report on it. And that's where the ESG movement is going. It's era of accountability and really holding the feet to the fire against all these declarations. But more specifically, you're seeing an enormous movement around the HR side of the business in terms of looking at diversity and inclusion, equity, in the hiring process, in the composition of leadership. In how the board is compiled and put together. And then also health and safety. I can't express enough how important this is, not only for the consumer, but for your employees, right? Is taking a whole different approach to looking at the employee side of this. And there's so much happening around buildings, for example, the return to work. Are they safe? What's the air quality? What retrofits should we be making? So there's a lot of investment that's going into the health and safety side of this. but it's still an area that is lagging where the E is, and S needs to come up more. And then lastly, I'll share with you, there's a very big element of this around the communities or the risks that go outside of what we think of as traditional climate. Unfortunately, the underserved populations are in some of the worst areas for climate impact, right? For climate change. There's a lot of work being done around commercial real estate about what happens if public transportation is cut off from the homes and areas where the workforce lives in those areas. So anyway, I could go on and on about that, but suffice to say, the S is coming. The era of accountability is real. And I'm really excited to see where that where this is going to continue to evolve.
Mike, any thoughts you have as we're covering some of the ground?
Yeah, Lou, Don here. Can you add a little perspective in the news recently? Israel, Unilever banned the sale of Ben & Jerry's in the occupied territories. I don't know if it's all of Israel, but that would be like a global example of what you're talking about, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And there's some real, I mean, it's a tough topic for these publicly traded companies, right? I mean, you could take that, you could look at Nike with Colin Kaepernick, you can look at Patagonia, with the political elections and such. I mean, so some of these companies say, it may hurt my organization in the short term. It's someone like CVS when they took cigarettes out, right? No tobacco was ever sold. It was billions of dollars of revenue to their organization, and they took it out because they were going towards their values, towards their purpose, and that is all tied into this ESG. So Ben & Jerry's, again, wherever you sit in terms of looking at them as an organization, they stay on their task. They're true to their purpose, and they make those decisions. And the followers, the supporters, the consumers, and the financial markets that embrace them love that, and it ties very much into that authenticity of their ESG.
Yeah, thanks for the explanation. Maybe they'll come out with a flavor called West Bank or something.
I do have one, if I could ask.
Sure.
A minute ago, when you were in your introduction, you said a statement that grabbed me and I'm thinking, if I put myself in the shoes of an entrepreneur or a business owner, you said, paraphrasing again, you said something about, and you're going to be scored by it. Can you explain that to me as to how that, and maybe it's coming up in your notes somewhere, but I don't want to jump the gun, but how is Mr. Business Owner in the marketplace? How does he know what to do in order to get a good score? For a test, to get a score, you got to study, you got to know your stuff, and maybe some of this stuff's applicable, some's not. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, great question, Mike. So let me frame it this way, and I'm going to start with the enterprise publicly traded organizations.
Sure.
So they are actually scored on their E, the S, and the G, and then the total. And currently, there are multiple standards that are out there. You'll hear terms like GRI and CDP and SASB. So there's all these different standards. And that's a challenge, right? Because there's not one standard. And the industry is moving towards this one standard. But I'll give you an analogy. Way back in the accounting, the financial side, right? Remember, this is the non-financial to the financial. When the financial world, generally accepted accounting principles came on as the standard, GAAP, right? And every financial disclosure is tied to GAAP accounting. I believe that ESG is moving towards the one standard, and we're going to have, and there's powerful organizations all coming together in a coalition to come up with this one standard. It will be the equivalent of GAAP for ESG. And so these companies, the publicly traded companies, will all need to adhere to that and report against that, and thus their score will come from that standard. Now, as a supply chain, I'm going to make an assumption that many of our guests, our audience is privately held in the supply chain. I'm just going to make that assumption. And so you say, I'm not scored, I don't have to worry about that. That's where I come back to a company's ESG score isn't just their operations in-house or their production plants or their HR and their employees. It includes their supply chain. There's a very large retailer who in their ESG report, annual report, and these are just like financial reports, there's ESG annual reports, stated that their scope 3 emissions, their greenhouse gas emissions for their company, 94% comes from their supply chain, not from their operations of all their stores and all their different facilities and production plants. It comes from their supply chain. So as they go to report their ESG efforts, it's incumbent upon them to put pressure and find partners. I'd rather look at it that way, is who's like-minded, who shares our values, and who's going to work with us to help us build towards a better world and our ESG and the balance. And so that's where I happen to think there's a really winning formula for the people on this listening in and tuning in, is if you seize this moment, you're in a position to differentiate from your competition. You're in a position to earn business and really drive ROI. So that's truly coming.
Lou, to that point, you made the biggest point that any one of our listeners out there, as we talk about the show and the privilege we have for people to be listening and also to be listening to you, our privilege to have the audience. But at the end of the day, being selfless, I am going to offer this, and it's a selfish thing. I would normally not do this, but for anyone listening out there, LinkedIn, ESG, see what it pulls up. Amazing that you actually aren't cold calling a marketing manager, a Marcom, a trade show manager, et cetera. You're reaching out to the head of ESG and saying, hi, I'd like to introduce ourselves, fully committed. I think we can help you with your ESG perspective. Can we have a conversation? That person wields equally strong influence as procurement, and maybe more so in certain ways. So again, how we market, how we sell, bringing it to the Benjamins, the dead presidents, and to the things that help us hire people and prosper. Again, it's a whole avenue, it's a whole opportunity, how companies brand, how they manage facilities, how they operate, how they use materials in events and programs and recyclability, things our industry is very well suited to do with all the rental components. As far as we've come with the reusability that used to be landfills of laminate, plywoods, and glues, and all the chemicals that go with that. We've come a long way. I think to your point, it's a mindset, it's a shaping, and it's really being a student of our game. And this is such an important aspect.
Well, I would build on that, Shawn, and say, so here's the key. Let's maybe the last two segments are going to get into opportunity and what actions you can take. So the opportunity I've witnessed just through my own ESG advising to organizations, we're winning. I mean, we are driving business, and we are making an impact on society and with employees and such. So, I would say, look at this as an opportunity to go on the offensive. And most organizations, especially the larger organizations, look at this as defense. It's like compliance. I've got to do this, right? But the real winners are the ones that see this as a differentiator. It's a value proposition to their stakeholder group. So differentiate. Lean into your value proposition. Look at, where can you align your values with your customers? Look at alliances. I really believe in the power of collaboration. And, I've enjoyed all the different discussions Shawn and I have about work we can do together. I mean, the power of collaboration, especially when you have shared values, can be just really profound. And so, I think that there is, understanding and learning what your customers are doing, like where is this impacting them? And there is a lot of data out there, but clearly this is an opportunity to also innovate. People forget that, it's not just coming up with a different material or how can we avoid the waste stream. It takes innovation, and innovation in terms of how we construct things, how we make things, how we end of life for these things, how we do things internally. So innovation plays a huge role in this. And the innovators are the ones that are going to win as well. And I really believe that. But the key is back to the term authenticity. I caution you that just going after an ESG oriented entity or executive with a solution that might help them with a display or some signage or even the shipping as they start to learn more about what you're kind of walking the walk, what are you doing as a company to make sure that you're not quote unquote greenwashing or ESG washing this in terms of just putting a spin on it to try and get my business, or to the consumer. That's a big issue. Are you buy this item and we're going to plant a tree in your name? Is what's the rigor behind that? What's the impact behind that? The consumer is much more savvy to look at that. And this goes way back to things like breast cancer and what was called pink washing and, all these different things. But there's a real concern about authenticity. And the good news is most companies, if they do an internal kind of review and form an ESG committee, that's part of what I would recommend. There's such low-hanging fruit that you can adopt change in your own operations to start to build a narrative around what are you doing internally that aligns with your external efforts with your clients. And so it's thinking about things of engaging various different people inside the organization. Come up with a list of material topics that are important to your organization. Think about your various different stakeholders. Like, why do we give money to this charity? How does that align with our values, and how does that align with our audiences? Get really strategic about it. Meet with your clients, right? And talk about what things would they like to see change. So I think as much as going to clients with solutions, it's also about, we're on a journey. Declare a journey that you're on. ESG isn't an overnight thing. ESG is ever evolving. It's a journey. And I encourage all my clients to always look at this and say, put a stake in the ground, start with kind of that low-hanging fruit, start to transform, engage, collaborate, talk with your customers, and you're going to find a whole different type of discussion. And now you're not a commodity, right? There's no longer that, kind of one-on-one, what's your price? It's no longer about price. It's about value. So those are some of my thoughts.
By the way, we're ready to break out of here and leave the locker room and go on the field. Really exciting. Dave, I know you're listening in, and I know you've spent some decent time with us with these programs, and from your background from media, broadcast, messaging, really working with some of the bigger agencies in the world. What would your thoughts be on, from your perspective as we've kind of moved on with the discussion?
I think of authenticity and accountability. A lot of brands throughout the years have tried to make a claim that they're virtuous or socially responsible, but they didn't have anything to really be the watchdog to make sure they were practicing what they were preaching. And now, as Lou's discussed, they've got to walk the walk, or else these very savvy and intelligent Gen Z and the next millennials are really going to catch them on that. As we've seen, Shawn, one of the largest holding companies in media, WPP, is leading the charge where they're dedicating, I think, up to 15% of their investment to, minority-owned advertising and business companies. So this is a very real thing. I think the pandemic for the past 18 months has really accelerated it. I think it's a fortunate thing that is great for the world, but brands really need to talk the talk. And it's going to be exciting to see what happens in the future with that.
That's great. Thank you. Well, Don, Mike, I know we've had segments together. We have more planned. I will tell you, we're so proud to be with you and to have this chance to set some of these chapters and segments. Lou and Sterling, we're so pleased and proud to have you. Look, we're a proud industry. We're a tight industry. We've had quite our road, and we've had our times we want to evolve, and most times we're kind of are forced to evolve. But as you guys think about it, what would be your last thoughts as we move ahead, or any last questions for Sterling or for Lou?
I'll go first. Because I have the right to remain silent, but I don't have the capacity. I have some thoughts, some concern, not concerns. Let me backtrack. I think the fact that businesses are different across the board. If I'm sitting in my XYZ company and Don's sitting in his ABC company, we're probably going to look at ESG differently, first of all. And I'm going to have emphasis, for instance, on E and G, I'm just picking two letters, and you're going to have heavy on S and partial G and maybe a little bit of E. And so it's going to be across the board. And that would be another, if you give a brief reply to the fact that businesses are so different across the board, I don't see a major symmetry with every single business going down the same line. Do you see the same thing? It's just going to be a different level of which emphasis is going to be on which letter, if you will. How do you see that?
ESG really probably took the most foothold with the G first. And think about it, it was natural because G is dealing with the financial world and compliance and regulatory and dealing with, disclosures, right? And so as ESG came out, it was natural to start, the C-suite started right there. They all started looking at what are we going to do? So they engage their CFO, they engage their advisors. What are we going to do around ESG? But as you start to peel it back and look at it, there's some common elements that every organization is looking at. If you look, I read every day countless ESG annual reports, and I see some very similar elements. United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Everyone is aligned with US, what they call UN SDGs. You can look by category of business or industry, right? Like, so in the trade show exhibit event business, I can tell you one of the big elements that's across the board with everyone is waste, right? Everyone's looking at waste, and so as you look into a commercial real estate, as another example, the two top topics for everyone in the industry are decarbonization, so greenhouse gas emissions, your energy and how you operate the buildings, and climate risk. Climate risk is right there, 1A, 1B with decarbonization. So the entities that are involved in various industries, I would say there's some common factors or common risk elements that's unifying everyone in that ecosystem or that industry to rally around. So that's where you see the common. The differentiators are what is authentic to your organization, right? You might lean more into the social aspect. I say own it, go with it, and really drive it. And the key is to how you share that and bring it alive with your upstream and your downstream partners.
Fair enough. Don?
Yeah. Hey, Lou, I've learned a lot from this short discussion, opened my eyes to a lot of things. I'll be looking forward to watching changes as they keep coming at us.
I agree. I think it's been a eye-opening experience for both Don and I. And I think we should say thank you very much for, first of all, the hospitality. You got an amazing studio here. It's the first time we've had an opportunity to step in, and hopefully it won't be the last that we would be able to come back and talk about that. So thanks for hosting us today.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Honored to have you here. And again, Sterling, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lou, again, we're very fortunate as a group to have you. You're one of the most sought after experts in this space. And this is a compilation of one of the more storied careers I certainly know of. And we're excited for the future where we go, appreciative for your influence in the inertia that gets peers and friends of ours going. And look, this is not the end of this. Obviously, this is the beginning. So we really appreciate you and thank you for all this time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And the best way I can amplify that, Shawn, is say, remember, this is a journey, and we're on it together, and collectively, in our united efforts, we can multiply change. So let's get after it.
And we will be right back after this.